Hey everybody, Captain B-Nard here with your BHDL2 Week 3 recap and Week 4 preview. So, we're just going to go ahead and dive right into this. This match was against Emerald Miner. He is a very seasoned Draft League participant, strong competitive battler, as well a YouTuber. And I forgot to mention that going into this match, we were both coming in at a 1-1 record. So, incredibly critical game for both of us to try and build some momentum going forward in the rest of the season here. And so this was also actually our third match here on Scarlet and Violet as well, so kind of a rubber match of sorts between the two of us. And so fortunately, we were able to get the win in this one 2-0, but it was an incredibly close, competitive, and hard fought game as well on both sides. And yeah, just very happy to come away with the win in this one. So, having said all of that, we're going to go ahead and throw it over to the team preview screen. So here you can see the 6 Pokemon he brought to the battle on the right-hand side, 6 Pokemon I brought on the left. And so as you can see, he brought the Iron Valiant, Pink Urchin, Hawlucha, Toxtricity, Ogerpon Wellspring, and Heatran. So, quite honestly, this was pretty much exactly the team that I thought he would bring, looking at his team and looking at what he matched up well against my team. There were really no surprises here on his side. This was pretty much the exact 6 Pokemon that I thought he would bring. Looking at my team this week, I did bring the Goodra, Mudsdale, Kilowattrel, Palafin, Glimora, and Ogerpon Hearthflame. So, I guess not a ton of surprises on my side either. Again, since it's early in the season, kind of haven't really fallen into too much of a pattern. Although I believe as of this point, I have been bringing the Kilowattrel, Palafin, and Ogerpon every week, and then the other half of the team has kind of been variable. But yeah, no really big surprises on my side that I would say either. So, but yeah, having said that, we're just going to keep it rolling here, and we're going to move right into the weekly pros and cons. So, once again, no, that is not a typo on the screen. For this week, we have only weekly pros. There are no weekly cons for the game this week. And so we are going to go over all of those right now. So, obviously, the big pro of the week here is that we did win the game 2-0. Once again, a very competitive, high octane game. Very hard fought, as I had mentioned. And yes, obviously, getting the win when we do is always going to be the big pro of the week because that is going to advance us one step closer to getting a playoff spot, which is, of course, always our big goal here in draft league. So obviously, very, very happy to get the win there for a couple of reasons, actually, which we will kind of delve into here in a second. So, but other pros of the week here include this was actually a very even match. And so, what I mean by that is actually pretty much in every aspect of the phrase, even match. So, looking at both of our teams on paper, I think they are very evenly matched in terms of power and utility and offensive and defensive capabilities. Pretty much everything seems pretty evenly matched. Additionally, the actual game went down very evenly. It was quite the roller coaster, actually, if you've seen it, which I, again, assume everyone watching this at this point has seen the game. But it was quite the roller coaster of a match, very back and forth. And so we both also played very similarly. So neither of us played a perfect game, but we both definitely made some very good calls and also some not so great calls as well. So there are actually four calls in particular on my side that I want to mention here. Actually, two good and two bad. So um, the first good call that I made in the game here was relatively early on when I have the Gudra in against my opponent, and I kind of predict the switch out. I believe it was against this Toxtricity, so he actually Volt switches out into the Heatran here to take potential Dragon attack, and so I kind of anticipate that and go for the Scald instead, which ends up breaking his air balloon and inflicting some really solid chip damage. to the Heat Ran. So that was a move that I was particularly proud of in this game. It was a good call. Unfortunately, I kind of followed that up with a not so good call immediately the turn after, because then he pulls the double switch from the Heat Ran back into the Ogre Pond Wellspring, anticipating that I go for another Scald. And I could have easily anticipated that switch and gone for like a Sludge Bomb or a Draco Meteor or something, but um, I was kind of I wanted to play it safe, and in hindsight, I think that was a mistake because he already knew I had the Scald on deck. So I should have been able to anticipate that he was going to switch into the Ogre Pond Wellspring to get that water absorb. And so I did not call that one correctly, and obviously that would have been huge if I could have got that prediction correct. But unfortunately, that was not the case, so that ended up not working out so well. But then a little bit later on in the game, we have two plays right next to each other once again. Um, in this situation, I had a situation where I had my Glamora in against my opponent's Hawlucha. The Hawlucha is already set up at, I believe, +1 attack and +2 defense. And so he goes for a Drain Punch on my Glamora and gets a bunch of HP back. It actually does over half damage, looking to be at about, I want to say, maybe 60-ish% damage to me. And so even after the Black Sludge and Grassy Terrain recovery based on the damage output of the first Drain Punch, it definitely doesn't look like Glamora can take a second one. So I opt to just click Mortal Spin instead of Sludge Wave because I figure I'm going to go down anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And this is a life lesson, folks. Never, ever, ever assume that because he goes for the second Drain Punch, and sure enough, I actually do live the Drain Punch with the Glamora with like barely any HP. So I would come to find out that that first Drain Punch was actually a max roll. So it was maximum damage output without a critical hit on the first Drain Punch. So that's why it looked like I couldn't take two. But it ended up that I actually could take two, and so I went for the Mortal Spin instead of the Sludge Wave. Had I gone for the Sludge Wave, that would have immediately knocked the Hawlucha out, and that would have been actually great for me. But unfortunately, I go for the Mortal Spin instead, and that does end up doing some chip and poisoning the Hawlucha, as well removing his hazards, but it doesn't actually take the Hawlucha out. So I only am going to call this as half of a misplay on my side, because as it turns out later in the game, being able to have removed those hazards at that point in the game when I did actually did end up benefiting me quite a bit, actually, when it came to bringing my Palafin in later on in the game, and not having to take hazard damage every time Palafin switched in. So that was a play that at the time seemed pretty bad. And it was kind of bad at the time, but there was a silver lining to the play for later on in the game that actually did kind of work out in my favor. So but lastly, speaking of the final play, this was just a couple turns after the play that I had just mentioned with the Glamora and the Hawlucha. I bring in the Palafin to face my opponent's Hawlucha that is extremely chipped at this point. Now, Palafin is at full HP, and it is not in hero form. However, I am max attack choice banned, and I know that from the health that the Hawlucha is at this point, that the choice band Jet Punch should be enough to KO the Hawlucha from that range. So, I also know my opponent has an Ogre Pond Wellspring that is still alive with barely any HP left. So I make a very risky prediction here, and I decide to anticipate that my opponent will switch the Hawlucha out into the Ogre Pond Wellspring to try and get that water absorb, regain some HP, and then try and survive for a couple more turns, because I know the Ogre Pond, upon switching in, will go down to one more round of poison damage as it is poisoned. So as he does switch the Ogre Pond Wellspring in, I decide to double switch the Palafin out into the Kilowattrel, thus allowing the Ogre Pond Wellspring to go down to the poison damage. So that was a very risky play on my side, because had he attacked with the Hawlucha, it would have been pretty bad for me. Although it wouldn't have been the end of the world. But I decided to make a risk there, and it actually did pay off, and I was actually pretty proud of myself for that play. I think that was the play of the game, at least on my side, because that meant the Ogre Pond Wellspring goes down to poison, and that meant that Palafin was also now in hero form, which meant that Palafin could kind of have free reign to do what it does best, which is spam those jet punches. So So yeah, I was very happy with that play. So um, I put this in the pros because even though I had heavily considered putting some of the plays I made in the cons, but I put this in the pros section just due to the fact that I think that because it was an even match, we both made some good reads and some not so good reads. Um, so I think that that kind of evens out. Like I said, those are two big examples of two good and two not good reads that I made in this one. So but yeah, moving on from that, other pros of the week here are going to include that there were very minimal hacks in this game. So the only actual hack that occurred this whole game, I think, was relatively early on when my opponent has the Ogre Pawn Wellspring in. As I had mentioned before, it comes in on the Gudra for free on a Scald, and so I decided to stay in here and go Sludge Bomb because I figure it's not worth the risk of the potential of this Ogre Pawn setting up. So he goes for the play rough, and I do survive the play rough on 10 HP. I'm not sure if that was a roll or not, as the Gudra was max HP invested. So depending on his set, it may or may not have been a roll. I don't know. Um, but we do survive, go for the sludge bomb, and we actually do end up getting a poison on the Ogre Pond Wellspring. So that's how that Ogre Pond Wellspring got poisoned. That actually played a big factor later in the game. So that was probably the only hack of the game that happened, and I think that that really ended up helping me greatly in this one. So. But other than that, I don't think that's too bad, given the fact that it was a very long game, and given the fact that it was just a very it was about a half hour, I want to say. So it was very it was a very long game. So the fact that that was the only thing that had occurred at that point, I think was not bad, all things considered. So and then finally, the last pro I have to mention here is the redemption. So for those of you who may or may not know this, if you've been watching for any length of time, you might know that my opponent for this week, as I mentioned, we had some history with some battles, and the most recent match that we had was all the way back in the BHDL1, where there was a situation, you guys might remember this, the infamous freeze of week 2, where his Articuno ended up getting the freeze on my Hawlucha back in that game, which ended up massively hurting us, perhaps costing us the game. In that one. So obviously there's a bit of a sweet satisfaction in getting one back on this guy after that happening back in last season of the draft. So that's just kind of an added bonus to this game. But once again, extremely close, competitive, hard-fought match here. And as I had mentioned before, with that, the Pidgeys will climb up to a 2-1 record here, moving forward in the BHDL2. So, speaking of moving forward, that is going to bring us to our um, look at our next week's opponent and team. And that is, of course, going to be DeBest Not Really, who is an individual who we have played once before here, actually in the last season of the Draft League. And yeah, here's a snapshot of his team. So obviously, he has some premier high point value threats on this team here. He's got stuff like the Gliscor, the Sneasler, the Hisuian Zoroark, the Reggie Drago as well. But he also has some strong utility options as well, like the Foretris. He's got the Florges as a Terra Captain, which could be very powerful. He obviously has stuff like the Delphox and the Paldean Tauros Aqua form, which could potentially be problematic, especially with the Delphox being a Terra Captain. And of course, we have to mention that he has that big X factor here in the Ditto, which is obviously something that is a heavy consideration for anyone in Draft League that wants to try and set up in any capacity, because obviously Ditto can quickly put a stop to that. So definitely going to be another difficult week for us for sure, but we are going to, of course, try to keep the momentum going, and hopefully we can get it going once again here against this team. So, but that'll pretty much do it for this one. Thanks for watching again, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed it. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, and/or subscribe if you did enjoy, and stay tuned for more new videos in the future. So that's it, and we'll see you next time.